They didn't need to say it outright. I could see it in their smirks. Every time I opened my mouth, something shifted in the room. Heads turned. Giggles escaped. Whispers traveled faster than sound. You don't need to be hit to feel pain. Sometimes, all it takes is a room full of people laughing when you're just trying to say your name. My name is Elena Thomas. And the first time I truly felt small wasn't because of where I came from. It was because of how I sounded. We moved to the US from India when I was 14. Just me and my mother. After my father passed away in a tragic car accident, she sold everything. Our family home in Kochi, her wedding gold, even Dad's old scooter, to give us a new beginning. A safer future. We landed in Virginia with 2 suitcases and one American dream. Oak Ridge High was our neighborhood's good school. Good, I learned quickly, had a very specific definition. Nice buildings, award-winning debate teams, expensive sports gear. But kindness? That wasn't on the curriculum. I was nervous that first day, but hopeful. I had always loved school. Back home, I was top of my class. The idea of learning in a new country, even if it meant wearing itchy polyester uniforms and carrying a lunchbox with food that smelled too spicy to them, was thrilling. That hope lasted exactly 8 minutes into first period. English class. The teacher asked me to read the opening paragraph of To Kill a Mockingbird aloud. I stood up, book trembling in my hands, and began. In my first memories of Atticus. The first giggle came from the middle row. Then a snort. Then more laughter, scattered like dropped coins. I paused. Flushed. The teacher said nothing. Just waited for me to continue. Eyes politely blank. I finished the paragraph somehow, each word sticking in my throat like glue. When I sat down, my desk mate whispered, "You sound like Apu from The Simpsons." The whole row laughed. That's when I learned that here, having an accent wasn't interesting. It was ammunition. Lunchtime was worse. I found an empty corner of the cafeteria and opened my tiffin box. Mom had packed rice with egg curry and papadum. The scent reminded me of home. But to everyone else? Oh my God, what is that smell? Did something die in her lunchbox? Who brings curry to school? I snapped the lid shut and threw the food away. Went hungry that day. And the next. And the next. At home, I lied. Tummy ache, Amma. Didn't feel like eating. She'd look at me with tired eyes, wiping sweat from her brow after a 12-hour shift as a hospital janitor. Okay, Molly. But don't skip too many meals. If only she knew. It wasn't just the students. Even the teachers would squint slightly when I spoke in class, repeating my words back slowly, as if I were hard of hearing. The counselor once suggested I try ESL, even though I was reading Jane Eyre for fun. I began speaking less and less. Not because I didn't want to talk, but because I was terrified of how it would sound. Each word felt like a risk. Each sentence a gamble. In India, I was called articulate, sharp, quick-witted. Here, I was just the quiet Indian girl. Funny how a voice can be the difference between seen and invisible. There were 3 girls in particular, Tiffany, Haley, and Brooke, who made it their daily mission to break me. They'd mimic my voice when I walked by. Leave sticky notes on my locker that said things like, "Call center queen," or, "Not feather." One time, they recorded me introducing myself in class and played it on loop during lunch, auto-tuned for extra humiliation. I reported it once. The assistant principal said, "Teenagers can be cruel, but try not to take it personally. Maybe try blending in more." Blending in? With who? They wore pastel crop tops and said like every 3rd word. I had 1 pair of jeans and a head full of languages. But I tried. I stopped wearing my bindi on special occasions. I began watching hours of American TV to mimic the way they said words. I asked my mom to cook sandwiches instead of dosa. I even downloaded pronunciation apps, spending nights practicing the R in girl so it wouldn't sound like ghoul. Still, nothing changed. Because no matter how much I altered, I wasn't what they wanted. One day in sophomore year, a substitute teacher called roll and paused at my name. "Elena Thomas," he attempted, confused. Before I could answer, someone shouted, "It's exotic Elena." with a side of spicy vowels. Laughter exploded. That was the moment I stopped fighting it. Not the accent, but the desire to belong. I wasn't broken. They just didn't know how to listen. I decided that day. One day they would. One day, I'd stand in front of them, not as a joke or a ghost in the back row, but as someone who owned the room. They laughed at my accent in high school, so I made them remember it. And that was only the beginning. There's a silence that doesn't come from peace. It doesn't come from stillness or contentment. It comes from shame. That's the silence I lived in for the rest of high school. After that first month of mockery, of laughter every time I raised my hand, of whispers every time I walked past, I made a decision. I would speak as little as possible. Not because I didn't have thoughts. Not because I didn't understand. But because my voice had become my enemy. I stopped participating in class. Even in subjects I loved, like history and English, I stayed quiet. When teachers asked questions, I looked down, letting someone else answer. Someone normal. Someone safe. Someone with the right vowels. They thought I was shy. Or maybe just not very bright. Nobody saw that the girl staring out the window in algebra was mentally solving the equations before they finished writing them on the board. Nobody saw that I stayed up late with a flashlight, reading Maya Angelou and Toni Morrison under the covers like they were lifelines. I just couldn't afford to give them more ammunition. Every word I said was another opportunity to be laughed at. So I stopped giving them words. My mother noticed something had changed. At dinner, she'd ask, "How was school, Molly?" I'd nod and say, "Good." She'd smile, exhausted from working 2 shifts at the hospital. "Make any new friends?" Another nod. Another lie. What was I supposed to tell her? That her daughter, the one she uprooted her life for, was being made to feel like a freak? That everything she sacrificed for this better life was sitting in a trash can next to my untouched lunch? She would have marched to the school and demanded justice. But I didn't want her to feel powerless, too. So I protected her the only way I knew how, by pretending everything was fine. Lunchtime became my daily disappearing act. Sometimes I'd hide in the library, wedged between bookshelves, pretending to be absorbed in a textbook. Sometimes I'd sneak into the bathroom stall, balancing my food on my lap and eating in silence while girls gossiped by the mirror. And sometimes I'd just sit under the bleachers, letting the cold metal press into my back as I stared at the sky and wondered, will I always feel this alone? It wasn't just about the accent anymore. It was about being told, in 1,000 different ways, that I didn't belong. There was one afternoon that burned itself into my memory. Sophomore year. English class. We were doing presentations on American literature. When it was my turn, I walked to the front with my note cards, hands trembling. I had practiced for hours, memorized every line, rehearsed every sentence in front of the mirror, twisting my tongue until it betrayed me less. I opened my mouth. This B-book, represents the journée of... Someone in the back coughed, loudly mocking my stammer. Another snorted. Then came the giggles. My face flushed. My mouth dried. I couldn't finish the sentence. The teacher gave me a pitying smile. "Thank you, Elena. You can sit down." I didn't even look at the class as I walked back to my seat. But I could feel it. The laughter that wanted to escape. The mockery that hung in the air, thick and sour. That was the day I decided I would never speak in front of a group again. And then came the yearbook quote. Senior year, we were asked to submit a quote that represented us. Something to go under our photo. Others picked lyrics or witty jokes or fake deep Instagram captions. I picked a line from one of my favorite authors. "Still, like dust I'll rise." Maya Angelou. But when the yearbooks came out, there was a typo. The quote under my picture said, "Still, like dirt I'll rise." I knew it wasn't an accident. I could tell from the way Tiffany smirked when she handed me the book. From the way Haley snickered in the hallway. Guess they got your mud accent right. I closed the yearbook and never opened it again. Not for graduation. Not even when my mom asked to see it. I just told her they ran out of copies. But even in the silence, something was growing. Like a seed in the dark, waiting for spring. Every time they laughed at me, I read another book. Every time they mocked me, I practiced speaking aloud in my room. I watched interviews, listened to podcasts, studied intonation. Not to erase my accent, but to understand my power. My voice. My story. Because slowly I realized I wasn't the problem. They were. They were too afraid of anything different. Too small to understand something big. And I was not small. I was just waiting for the right moment. So I kept quiet. Not because I was ashamed anymore, but because I was preparing. Building something stronger inside me. A fire. They thought I'd disappear after high school. That I'd fade into the background like I always had. But one day, I would walk back through those same doors. And this time, they'd have to listen. Even if they didn't recognize the voice. Because shame may silence you for a while. But it can't hold you forever. And me? I was getting ready to rise. They thought I vanished after graduation. No senior party invite. No goodbye hugs. No scribbled stay in touch messages in my yearbook. I walked across the stage at graduation with the same quiet presence I'd carried for 4 years. Tiffany rolled her eyes when I was handed my diploma. Brooke yawned mid-applause. They thought I'd disappear. What they didn't know was that I already had a plan. I enrolled in a small state college. Affordable. Quiet. Unassuming. No Ivy League glamour. But I didn't need prestige. I needed space to rebuild the version of myself they had tried so hard to break. And for the first time in years, I could breathe. No one mocked my accent when I spoke up in class. No one flinched when I said schedule with a soft accent. In fact, some of them leaned in. Some asked me where I was from. Not to laugh, but to listen. I made friends. Real ones. Like Marcy, a fierce Mexican-American girl who refused to apologize for her rolling RS. And Jasmine, a black student journalist who told me, if they're uncomfortable with your voice, it's because they've only ever heard their own echo. Together, we formed a small, unlikely sisterhood of the unheard. I majored in English and minored in education. Books were still my sanctuary, but now I wanted to teach. Not because I thought I could change the whole system overnight, but because maybe, just maybe, I could be the adult I never had. The one who didn't flinch when a student mispronounced a word. The one who saw silence not as weakness, but as a wound. I started tutoring kids in underfunded districts, immigrants, first gens, ESL students. One boy, Luis, reminded me of myself at 14. He was bright. Brighter than most kids his age. But he refused to speak in class. I sound dumb, he whispered once, after I asked why he never volunteered. And I felt it all rush back. The tightness in the throat, the shrinking spine, the fear of being seen. So I shared my story with him. Not the cleaned-up version. The raw one. The bathroom lunches. The voice I buried. The shame that clung to me like skin. His eyes widened. You too? That's when I knew. My voice had value. Even if the wrong people once tried to silence it, the right ones needed to hear it. After undergrad, I applied for a master's in educational leadership. A few professors warned me, gently, it's a competitive program. You might want to aim for something more realistic. You're quiet, Elena. Principals have to command a room. I smiled politely. But inside, I was screaming. You think I can't lead because I don't sound like you? Because I don't perform power the way you're used to seeing it? Because I choose precision over volume? They didn't realize. You don't have to yell to be heard. You just have to speak with purpose. I got in. Grad school was a war zone in a different way. Group projects where men talked over me. Panel discussions where I was the only woman of color in the room. Supervisors who praised me as well-spoken. As if that was a surprise. But I kept pushing. And when I finally walked across that stage, master's degree in hand, I didn't hear laughter. I heard silence. Not the silence of shame, but the silence that comes right before a storm. A few years later, after teaching in several schools, mentoring dozens of young students, and earning my reputation as a results-driven educator, I saw the posting. Principal, Oak Ridge High School. I stared at the screen for a long time. Oak Ridge. That Oak Ridge. The same polished halls that once felt like a prison. The same place where they turned my voice into a punchline. The irony was bitter and beautiful. My hands shook slightly as I typed my application. Not out of fear, but because I knew this wasn't revenge. This was redemption. The interview panel at Oak Ridge looked familiar. Not the faces, those had changed, but the types. Well-dressed.
Polished. White.
I walked in wearing a navy blue pantsuit and a silver bindi tucked beneath my bangs. My accent hadn't disappeared. It had evolved. Softened in some places. Sharpened in others. But it was still mine. One of the board members squinted at my resume. "You attended Oak Ridge?" he asked, surprised. "I did," I said calmly. "Graduated in the top 3%. Quietly. They chuckled. "I didn't." Another one asked, "How do you plan to connect with the students?" I leaned forward, looked each of them in the eye. "By listening to the ones no one hears. By making sure that no child ever has to eat lunch in a bathroom stall. By showing them that leadership doesn't have one voice, it has many." There was a long pause. Then one of them whispered, "Well said." Of course it was. I'd been preparing to say it for years. I got the call 3 days later. "Elena Thomas? Congratulations. Welcome back to Oak Ridge High. You're officially our new principal." I looked at my reflection in the mirror. The same girl. Same eyes. Same fire. But this time, they couldn't laugh me out of the room. They'd already given me the microphone. And I was just getting started. They didn't even recognize me at first. The teachers. The secretaries. Even the security guard by the front door. He greeted me with a polite smile, clipboard in hand, not realizing I'd once cried in the hallway just 10 feet from where he stood. "Name?" he asked. "Elena Thomas," I said, smoothing the sleeve of my navy blazer. His brow furrowed for a second. Then it passed. He waved me in. Funny, isn't it? They forgot me. But I remembered everything. The way the halls smelled like floor wax and stale cafeteria pizza. The way my shoes used to squeak when I walked too fast, trying to avoid the popular girls. The locker that was slammed shut with gum in the handle because someone thought my silence made me a target. But this time, I wasn't hiding. This time, I had the keys. The first day as principal of Oak Ridge High felt surreal. The office was twice the size of my childhood bedroom. Framed degrees lined the walls, each one a battle scar disguised as an achievement. I placed a small photo of my mother on the desk. She was smiling, standing outside our old apartment, her nurse scrubs wrinkled, her hands still damp from dishwashing gloves. "You did it, Molly," I whispered. "This wasn't just for me. It was for her. For the hours she worked. For the food she skipped so I could eat. For the accent she never apologized for." At the faculty orientation, I stood before 20 staff members who were used to something else, used to someone else. I introduced myself, calm and measured. I didn't over-explain, didn't shrink, didn't stammer. "Good morning. I'm Elena Thomas. I'm your new principal." A few raised eyebrows. A few curious glances. I could hear it in the silence between their polite nods. "She looks young. She's so quiet. Where is she from exactly?" But I didn't flinch. Because when you've spent half your life being underestimated, you learn how to let doubt sharpen you, not stop you. I walked the halls slowly that first week, letting it all wash over me.
Some rooms were exactly the same.
The same crooked motivational posters. The same flickering lights. But the students? The students looked different. More diverse. More layered.
More me.
There were girls in hijabs sharing TikToks between classes. Boys speaking Spanish and Korean and Tagalog on the way to gym. A shy black girl who tucked her poetry journal beneath her hoodie as I passed. That was who I came for. Not the cool kids. Not the legacy families. Not the ones who always knew they belonged. I came back for the ones still questioning it. One morning, I walked into the teacher's lounge for coffee and heard them before they saw me. I mean, she's nice enough, but don't principals usually have more presence? Maybe she's just nervous. She barely says a word in meetings. I heard she was one of those quiet kids who just studied all day. Weird, right? They turned around, and there I was, I didn't say a thing. Just poured my coffee, calm and steady. Let them sit in their awkward silence. Then I looked up and said, evenly, "You know what they say, still waters run deep." And I walked out. They had no idea how many years I'd waited for that moment. The students, though, they saw me. One day, in the library, I found a girl named Priya crying quietly in the back corner. Her homework was crumpled. Her phone buzzed with messages she didn't want to read. I didn't ask questions. I sat beside her. And I said the words I wished someone had said to me. "They won't always understand you, but that doesn't mean you're wrong." She looked up slowly, wiped her eyes, and whispered, "You talk like me." That was all she needed. Not an essay, not a speech, just to know someone else had survived it. By mid-semester, the school had changed in small, invisible ways. Lunch tables became more inclusive. Shy students started raising their hands. A kid who wore hearing aids ran for class president, and won. I introduced language-inclusive parent nights, started mentorship programs for immigrant and first-gen students, gave space for culture clubs to meet without approval from above. Because I was above now, and I remembered what it felt like to be underneath everything. Then came the email. Subject line, "Alumni guest speakers, 10-year reunion planning." I nearly laughed. Because guess who was helping organize it? Tiffany Markham, Oak Ridge royalty turned suburban real estate agent. She hadn't changed much, judging by her profile photo. Still blonde, still filtered, still clinging to the past. She wanted to come speak to the students.
Inspire them, she said.
I replied, "We welcome alumni stories. I'll be there to introduce you personally." She didn't recognize the name. Not yet. The day of the event, the auditorium filled with students and staff. I stood at the podium, microphone in hand. Tiffany sat in the front row, chatting confidently with her old cheer squad turned PTA moms. When I finally spoke, her smile froze. "And now, to welcome our special guest, allow me to introduce myself." I paused. "My name is Elena Thomas, principal of Oak Ridge High. 10 years ago, I sat in these very chairs, a student you barely noticed, unless you were laughing at my voice." The room fell still. "And today, I'm the one holding the mic." Tiffany's eyes widened. She blinked. Recognition hit like a slap. I didn't gloat. I didn't humiliate her. I simply said, "Some voices grow quieter over time. Others, they learn how to rise." And in that moment, I wasn't invisible anymore. I was undeniable. The auditorium lights were warm on my face. The stage creaked softly under my heels. My palms were steady, not sweating. My heart,
calm.
It should have felt like revenge. Tiffany was right there, front row, clutching her iced coffee with a death grip, legs crossed just so, forcing a smile that couldn't hide her disbelief. But this wasn't about her anymore. This was for every kid still scared to speak. Every immigrant student who swallowed their words. Every quiet girl who ate lunch alone. Every nobody like I used to be until today. I leaned into the microphone, letting the silence settle first. Then I began. I remember sitting in these same rows 10 years ago, barely breathing, afraid someone might call on me to read out loud. The room was still. No one whispered. Not even a phone buzzed. "My name is Elena Thomas. I was a student here. Back then, you didn't know me. Or if you did, you laughed." I looked out across the sea of faces, some curious, some stunned, some deeply attentive. I had an accent, one that made some of you cringe, made others laugh. I spoke softly, walked alone. I was called weird,
weak.
But what I really was watching, listening, learning. I paused, made eye contact with the back row. And now, I'm standing here not as your guest, but as your principal. A few gasps. One audible "wait, what?" from the middle row. Tiffany blinked hard, then looked down at her lap. "I want to speak to the students who feel invisible right now," I said. "The ones who sit in the back, who eat lunch by the vending machine or hide in the library. The ones who translate forms for their parents or who are too afraid to ask questions because someone once made them feel small. I took a breath and stepped away from the mic, letting my voice carry on its own. You are not too quiet. You are not too foreign. You are not less intelligent because your English isn't perfect. You are not wrong for taking your time. You are not behind. You are just building. Somewhere in the crowd, a girl wiped her eyes. I went on. I was never meant to lead in this place. At least, that's what they made me believe. But I worked. I studied. I failed and got up. I built my voice word by word in every tutoring session, every night class, every job interview where they told me, you're not quite the right fit. And I turned all of it into this moment. My voice didn't shake. It rang. I'm not telling you this to impress you. I'm telling you this because one day, you're going to walk into a room and they won't expect anything from you. That's your power. Because by the time they see you coming, it's too late. You've already become everything they said you couldn't. A boy in the second row sat up straighter. A girl with a headscarf nodded, eyes locked on mine. I could feel it in the air. Not attention, connection. For the first time in that room, I was not performing. I was being. I ended with this. To those who laughed at me back then, thank you. You sharpened me. You taught me how to speak only when it matters and how to make it count. I turned to Tiffany for half a second, long enough for her to know I'd seen her. But I didn't need to humiliate her. Success does that on its own. As I stepped down from the stage, the applause didn't come all at once. It started slow, thoughtful. And then it rose. A standing ovation, not the kind you get from clout, but the kind that comes from truth. Tiffany stayed seated. Of course she did. But that didn't matter. Because I'd already reached who I came for. Afterward, students came up to me in waves. A freshman boy said, Miss Thomas, I thought I was the only one who hated talking in class. A senior girl whispered, I've never heard someone speak the way I think. Even one of the teachers, a man who once interrupted me in every meeting, shook my hand and said, that was powerful. I didn't know. And I smiled. Because that's the thing. They never know. Until you tell them. Later that day, as I walked the hallways, I noticed something different. A group of students who usually avoided eye contact smiled as I passed. One girl started speaking Spanish with a friend, confidently. Another student walked with his head higher, books hugged tight to his chest. It wasn't just a speech. It was a crack in the wall. And through it, light was coming in. Wait, Elena? I turned slowly. There she was, Brittany Lane, still wearing too much perfume and the same smirk from high school, though now it clung to lines she hadn't yet accepted in the mirror. I thought that was you, she laughed, her voice still syrupy sweet and sharp underneath.
Wow.
You've really changed. Funny how they always say that like it's a compliment, like I should thank them for noticing. I gave her a polite smile.
Yes.
I have. Brittany leaned in, her tone fake whispering, and you don't even have the accent anymore. You sound like totally American now. I blinked once. That's because I always was. They'd come back for the 10-year reunion, their egos in full display. The old popular crowd. Tiffany, Brittany, Jordan, the ones who ruled the cafeteria with lip gloss and cruelty. They walked through the school like it still belonged to them. But now the walls didn't echo their laughter. They echoed mine. I gave them the standard tour, professional, composed, detached. They kept commenting on how weird it was to be back, how cool it was that I'd ended up here. I mean, principal? That's, like, impressive, Jordan said, eyes scanning my office like it didn't quite fit me. You were always kind of invisible. I smiled tightly. And yet, here we are. They laughed. I didn't. Because there's a kind of silence more powerful than any comeback. It's the silence of knowing who you are. Later that afternoon, they lingered in the staff lounge, sipping sparkling water and reminiscing loudly, half for each other, half to impress anyone still watching. You remember that time in Mr. Haskell's class? Brittany said, flipping her hair. When we made that girl read the poem and she said tree like cree? We died. They howled with laughter. I didn't need to ask who they were talking about. It was me. I stepped inside the room, calm and deliberate. They turned like a flock of startled birds. "Afternoon," I said. Brittany blinked, a little red creeping into her cheeks. "Oh, we were just joking. You know how kids are." I looked her in the eye.
Yes.
I remember exactly how kids are. That's why I became an educator. Silence. I walked to the counter, poured myself a glass of water, and turned around. You ever think about how one joke can live inside someone for 10 years? I asked, my tone even. Tiffany looked down. Jordan coughed awkwardly. You laughed once, I continued. But I carried it. Into college. Into job interviews. Into the mirror. Every time I thought my voice was too soft. Every time I questioned whether I belonged. You thought it was funny. I thought it was me. None of them spoke. And now, I lead the place you used to haunt. I didn't yell. I didn't cry. I just told the truth. And sometimes, the truth is enough to shake people harder than any raised voice ever could. They tried to recover, of course. Brittany offered a stiff apology. Tiffany mumbled something about kids being stupid. Jordan made a joke about how far we've all come. I accepted their apologies. But I didn't absolve them. Because forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. And growth doesn't require you to erase the pain. It just asks you to own it. That evening, as they posed in the hallway for their group photo, they tried to pull me into the shot. Come on, Elena. You're the success story. I declined gently. I already have the picture I need. Because the real photo? It was the girl in the library now leading the poetry club. It was the Latino student president introducing bilingual signs in the cafeteria. It was Priya, the girl I once found crying, now mentoring younger students. That was my yearbook. And it didn't need a filter. As the reunion wound down, Tiffany approached me alone. She was quieter than before, eyes uncertain. I didn't remember how bad it was, she said. I was so stupid back then. I nodded. We all were. But you, she added, you did something with it. You became someone. I always was someone, I said gently. You just didn't see me. She looked like she wanted to say more, maybe even cry, but instead, she just whispered, "Thank you for not becoming like us." I smiled. I didn't need to. You already showed me what not to be. That night, I locked my office alone, walked through the hallways in silence. Every tile had a memory, some ugly, some beautiful, all of them mine now. I stood in front of the old classroom where it all started, Mr. Haskell's poetry unit. The first time they laughed at my voice. And I said out loud, just once, I'm still here. Not angry, not broken, whole, and powerful in a way no popularity ever could have made me. You'd be amazed how loud silence can feel, especially when it's the silence of fear. I used to live inside that quiet, shrinking a little more every time someone laughed at the way I said February or tripped over a long English word I hadn't learned yet. But now, I was building a world where that silence wouldn't win, where no child would ever feel like their voice didn't belong. It started with something small. A student named Dina, a freshman with a shy smile and thick glasses, stood at my office door, clutching a wrinkled sheet of paper. She barely looked up when she spoke. Miss Thomas, do you think it would be okay to start a speaking club? Not debate, just a place to practice. Talking. Her accent reminded me of my own once. Tentative, careful, like she was apologizing just for speaking. I didn't hesitate. Not only is it okay, I said, I'll help you build it. We called it the Voice Lab. Every Thursday afternoon, a group of students would gather in the old drama room, desks in a circle, tea in paper cups, nervous laughter in the air. They read poems, told stories from their lives, practiced saying their names with pride. There were no grades, no critics, no corrections, just space, safe space. And slowly, voices rose. One day, I asked the group to finish the sentence. The thing I've been too afraid to say out loud is, there was silence at first. Then one by one they spoke. My mom doesn't speak English, and I hate how people look at her in stores. I'm gay, and no one in my family knows. I want to be a writer, but people say I should be realistic. I hate my accent, but I'm also scared of losing it. Each voice cracked something open. They weren't just learning how to speak, they were learning how to own their stories. I invited a few of them to read at the next school assembly. Dina's hands shook the whole time she stood behind the mic, but her voice? Stronger than I'd ever heard. She read a piece called "The Words That Live in My Grandmother's Hands." When she finished, the gym was quiet for a moment, then exploded with applause. Not polite clapping. Real, roaring, tear-stained applause. She looked over at me, wide-eyed. And in that look I saw it. She believed in herself. I began making quiet changes across the school, too. Announcements in multiple languages. A quiet corner in the cafeteria for solo lunchers to read or journal. Teachers trained on cultural sensitivity and unconscious bias. A student-led committee on inclusive language in classrooms. Nothing flashy, but it added up. Soon, the culture began to shift. Students corrected each other when they mocked someone's pronunciation. They held space for different kinds of brilliance, not just loud, fast, polished. We weren't just building voices. We were changing what it meant to be heard. Sometimes, I still heard whispers. She's doing too much. She's making everything political. Why fix what isn't broken? But I didn't flinch, because I knew exactly who I was doing this for. And if they couldn't see the cracks, it's only because they'd never been forced to live inside them. One day, after a voice lab session, a student named Leo stayed behind. He was tall, soft-spoken, and rarely made eye contact. He waited until the room cleared, then asked, "Miss Thomas, did it ever stop?" You know, being scared to speak.
I didn't lie to him. Not always, I said.
But now I speak anyway. And that's what power really is. He nodded slowly, then added, "I think you're the first adult who's ever talked to me like I matter." It broke me a little. And then it built me up stronger. That night, I stayed late at school, walking the quiet halls alone like I often did. The lockers hummed with memory. I passed the spot where I once dropped my lunch tray in 9th grade and heard the Snickers ripple behind me. Where I once pretended not to hear the word immigrant, whispered like an insult. Where I once wished I could disappear.
But now?
Now I had become the person I once prayed would find me. And better, now I was giving that gift to others. I walked into my office and wrote a single line across the whiteboard. Let them hear you. Because it's not about speaking perfectly. It's not about sounding like everyone else. It's about daring to speak, even when your voice shakes. And knowing that someone, maybe someone younger, quieter, braver, is listening. A letter was waiting on my desk. No name on the envelope, just my title. Principal Elena Thomas. It was handwritten, slightly shaky, old-school cursive. There was something about it that made me sit down before even opening it. I unfolded the paper slowly. And read. Dear Elena, I don't know if you remember me. My name is Mr. Haskell. I taught you English in your first year of high school. I've recently retired, and something about this quiet life made me think about the students I didn't do right by. You were one of them. You came into my class with wide eyes and a thick accent, and I remember how often I let the room laugh when they should have been listening. I should have shut it down. Should have protected you more. But I didn't. I was a new teacher, unsure, and I didn't realize until much later how deep those wounds could go. I heard you're the principal now, and when I heard that, I cried. Not because I was surprised, but because I was proud and grateful. You didn't let it break you. You came back and made it better. You've already done more for that school than I ever could. I just wanted to say I see you. And I'm sorry. With respect, James Haskell. I set the letter down and stared at the wall, suddenly aware of the storm inside me. Because he had seen it. He'd seen the way they laughed. The way I shrank. And now, after all these years, he was the first adult from that time to say, "I'm sorry. I didn't cry right away. Not out of coldness, but because the words hit a place too deep for tears. For so long, I thought healing meant forgetting. Letting go of the pain, pretending it never existed.
But it doesn't work that way.
Sometimes, healing means witnessing it all again. Every cruel joke, every dismissed question, every moment you felt small. And then realizing, you're still here anyway. That weekend, I sat at the edge of the school auditorium during the district's Youth Voices showcase. A dozen of our students were performing, spoken word, music, stories, even a mini play one group wrote about growing up bilingual in a monolingual world. The last performer was Dina. She stood on stage with trembling hands and fire in her voice. "My name is Dina," she said, clear and confident. "And I used to hate how I sounded. But now I know my voice carries the stories of every woman in my family. I'm not ashamed of it. I'm proud." The crowd erupted in applause.
I didn't clap.
I stood. Because this was more than a performance. This was a revolution. After the show, a parent came up to me, soft-spoken, eyes glistening. She said, "My son used to pretend to be sick just to avoid school. Now, he sets an alarm early just to get here first. He says you get him. I don't know what you did, but thank you." I shook her hand and smiled. He's always had the voice. We just helped him turn up the volume. Later that evening, as I walked past the trophy case in the front hall, I saw my reflection in the glass. Older, stronger, shaped by the past but no longer trapped in it. Next to the glass was a new plaque the students had surprised me with that week. Principal Elena Thomas. She gave us our voices. And in doing so, found her own. I went back to my office and pulled out an old shoebox I hadn't touched in years. Inside, a faded school photo of me from sophomore year. A detention slip from the day I refused to read aloud. My acceptance letter to UCLA. And the poem I once read in Mr. Haskell's class, the one they laughed at. I unfolded it gently. The paper crackled with time. It wasn't a great poem. It was full of clumsy metaphors and awkward phrasing. But it was mine. And now, for the first time, I read it aloud with no fear. No shrinking. No apology.
Just me.
We talk about revenge like it's fire and fury. But for me, revenge was soft and slow. It was becoming the kind of woman I needed when I was a girl. It was holding power and choosing to use it for healing instead of hurting. It was walking back into the halls where I once felt invisible and building something louder than pain, a legacy. I didn't come back just to show them who I'd become. I came back to show the next girl, the one who walks in scared, with an accent, a story, and a dream, that she's not alone, that her voice matters, that one day, the very place that made her feel small might become the stage where she learns to rise. My name is Elena Thomas. They laughed at my accent in high school. So I came back as the principal and made sure no one else would be laughed into silence ever again.